Welcome, welcome, welcome. I want to welcome you to our 1 o'clock in our session on this celebration of International Spaceflight Day on April 12th. If you're in the eastern seaboard of the United States, it's 1 p.m. If you are in New Zealand, as Adam is, it is now actually April the 13th. And it's 5 a.m. in the morning, right? So
Yes.
I'm very happy he decided to wake up and join us, because really it was nice to have a perspective of different parts of the world. It so happens that although Abraham is Nigerian, he's here in Washington, D.C. So we're going to have a really great conversation between the futurist and the space generation member. Let me introduce you both. So Adam Morris is a futurist. He works in the future space. He's part of many communities that do futuring in New Zealand. And I really wanted to have somebody from that part of the world in this session, in large part because New Zealand is at the cusp of working out new ways of looking at economic ownership structures. One of the things that I'm very concerned about is how are we going to deal with the shared economic resources? How will we, treat this idea of mining the moon and then owning pieces of the moon? I'm very nervous about that, and I think we can learn from indigenous communities in Australia and New Zealand who have been, and Ecuador actually, who've been trying to work out new forms of economic ownership and management of these things to see if that might be one path we take. So that's Adam Morris. And then we have Abraham Akinwale, who is an engineer. He is a space entrepreneur. He's operating in the drone community as one of his areas of interest. He's also the Human Resources Coordinator for Space Generation Advisory Council, which is a global organization led by young people. It's for young people. It's led by young people. And certainly I consider myself very privileged to be able to sit in the room. They have not thrown me out yet when I go to their meeting. So I sit in the room and I try to say as little as possible so that they don't, throw me out of their meeting. But I've been able to really meet some great young voices. And so he is one of the people who's actually shaping the future of space. And I definitely like to have him also talk. So our question here is, what next? What future for space? And by future, here, I'm not talking about tomorrow future. I'm talking about 2030 and beyond. 2030 is actually next door. So 2030 and beyond. And I'd like to ask Adam to start by either posing a question and answering it, or jumping in wherever he feels to jump in. It's very free-flowing conversation. And I'm asking everybody on the call again before we get started to, first of all, a quick exercise in futures thinking. I want you to picture yourself 2030. It's International Space Flight Day. That's 6 years from now. And by now, Artemis Accords are working, and there is a permanent presence on the moon. And there's a mini village. And I can tell you what my village is, because my village is called Lunarville. And Lunarville has now raised the money. We're not there yet, but we've raised the money to put up our own People's Village on the moon. But we do have, in the meantime, a metaverse version of what that looks like. So I have a lot of years of thinking about this, but I want to hear from you. What is the future you fear? Do you have concerns about people living on the moon? And what are they? Put them in the chat and we can begin to take it into this futures dialogue. One of the things I want to do as a space futurist is to be able to say, I've heard from people from different parts of the world, and here's some of their fears. When I'm in a room, I serve as a member of the Institute of Space Law and Ethics Committee on Leadership, and they're very much focused on moon settlement issues. So we have to be hearing from people what their concerns are. So let's start with Adam Morris. Dr. Morris, lead us off in your take on the future. What year are you in, by the way, and what's happening?
My head goes into a few places about what year I'm in. So it's, but if we were to look at, if I could just do a bit of a preamble on that, I guess, is just if we were to look at 2030, which is only where are we now? 6 years away. Sorry, 6 years away. That's really not that long, but I can see myself there. But I think on an operational level, in terms of, like that space operation level, business operational level, um, that's but then if I was to put my public sector hat on and my own personal hat on, I'd be thinking 2050 and beyond. So I guess I'm going to come from two places. If I was to think about that shorter term, first of all, I'm trying to imagine like how much would have started to happen on the moon. But I feel like certainly things that would have started happening is we'd start planning for these things. We're planning for how we're going to build on there. And I'm just making the assumption that's what we're doing, first of all. But what I'd want to see there, and from my perspective, but from the work we've been doing here in New Zealand, through the university, is that we've matured. We're starting to mature as a species in terms of what we're thinking about. So just properly thinking about why are we doing this, who are we doing this for, and how are we doing this? Because my fear is that if we don't consider a wide range of perspectives, if we don't think about the consequences of what we're developing there, then we're going to lock ourselves into bad practices of potentially exploitive sort of ways of doing things, particularly on planetary bodies like the moon. And what that's going to do is really impact that longer term view, that longer term horizon of where I personally hope we'll be, which is that we're not treating space as a thing that's for us to exploit. We're treating it as we're part of it, and it has its own intrinsic value, not just for us to take stuff from, but it's part of our future, and it's part of helping humans, because I'm going to be species centric there, but from a human point of view, it's helping us to live in the long term, which if we lock bad practices in, we're going to reduce the potential to be able to do that. So I guess it's not painting like a picture, but for me, and I think particularly from coming from a New Zealand perspective, what's really been interesting learning curve for me is how do we ensure that those visions aren't culturally biased, I guess, or coming from one particular culture. And we tend to think of I would say, around when we're thinking about space, and we use terms like colonization, which coming from New Zealand has a lot of weight in those terms, and so that means that you're excluding people from those narratives. So I really want to see a place where we've built genuine relationships, genuine decision-making partnerships as a whole in how we decide what we want to do, why we're doing it, who we're doing it for, and how we're going to do it. So yeah, so it's probably throwing a few more questions in.
A good place to start. Why are we doing it and who we're doing it for? Because that I don't think
Yeah.
we have a good we have the argument for space for Earth. Why are we doing this in terms of monitoring Earth? But we don't have a good question for exploration and settlement, really. And I think it's a good place to start, because before I bring up Abraham, one of the incidents that propelled me into space, quite frankly, was a conversation I had with somebody who runs this company called the Lunar Embassy. And this guy has been around for some time. He was trying to exploit a loophole in the Outer Space Treaty that says no country can own space. And he filed for ownership of the moon. And then he was selling plots of land, and everybody thought it was a big lark. And basically, I thought, well, I'm going writing this when I was writing my story before I even got into space. So in 2015, 2016, I'm writing my story about being on the moon. And I said, oh, let me call this guy and figure out what he's doing. So I called him, and then I noticed that they were going to have, because I was going to buy the plot to say I own a part of the moon for like $50 US. Then I noticed that he had this thing called the ambassador program. So, I'm in DC, so I always say, I want to be an ambassador. Great, I can be a lunar ambassador or something. I'm still thinking it's like, it's a gag thing. So I call this guy, and he says to me, man, we got to pay us $10,000, to get the right to be an ambassador. and you have to guarantee a certain number of sales of the moon. I'm like, wait a minute, this is for real. And I hung up the phone and I thought, oh my God, this is real. I've got to do something. So I started researching, and that's one of the triggers that got me into this moon story, being the first Jamaican on the moon and then backing into the space community. So Abraham, as you think about it as a young person from Nigeria, going to university in Nigeria, you know, just here in the US, but you're most of your, let's say your political and policy formation comes from a very Nigerian perspective. When you think about the future, whether it's near future, like Adam said, or far future, 2050, you're young, you're certainly going to be around in 2050. What's the future you fear or the future you want? What are you hoping to co-create? Because you're an active leader in the space community.
Oh, thank you so much. First of all, I want to say thank you for having me. I think it's a very good thing for us to gather here and discuss about the future of space, especially as to how different parts of the world are active in this and what exactly we can do moving into the future. Just like you said, I think it's a privilege for me to be a Nigerian, to have grown in Africa, to have experienced some things firsthand, you know, some of the challenges or the life experience and the beauty of life, so to speak. There's some people, you know, outside of the world, I think Africa is a country might not really know about, because Africa is a continent with 55 countries and over 1 billion people, the second largest continent in the entire, the second largest region in the entire world. And that is a very vital thing, because even though we are not as active as we are supposed to be at the current time, we have brilliant minds in Africa. We have brilliant minds all that have migrated from Africa to some other parts of the world. And when you look at even not just African, we even have some people from the Asian side that are very brilliant, but might not have the resources that some other parts of the world might have, especially when you talk about Europe and the North Americans. But one of the things that I look forward to going forward, because just like he said, 2030 is very, very close. And in terms of the Artemis, you know, Accord and some other treaties that have been signed, I believe there's a need for us to look at what is actually critical for each region, because we are now at a particular state in the world where, whether we like it or not, and that is why we have an organization like the Space Force being established, because people are not just on that liberal note using space for all anymore. There's now a context, you know, as it is being said from time beginning, wherever there's human beings, there seems to be always conflict. And moving forward, that is something that we always have to probably put into place, because it's a very beautiful thing for us to be looking forward into the future of space travel and how we get to the moon and how we have lunar landers and how we create an ecosystem into the moon. But we need to begin to raise questions about what exactly are we going to be doing there. And as a youth, personally, I believe it is very, very important for us to begin to educate the youth on the power of what is out there, on the power of our satellite, on the power of the space out there, on the power of the resources out there, for us to begin to raise the questions and deliberate on what exactly are we going to be doing. Are we going to follow the current status quo of conflict? There are so many treaties and resolutions that have not been signed because some countries at the moment have not agreed on what is of benefit to them. And I've heard so many astronauts say traveling to space, when they travel to space and they are looking at the Earth from up there, they don't see any border. They just see one blue ball, one Earth, you know. So we need to begin to train and educate even the young ones, begin to let them think about the future and have deliberations about the importance of it, the use of it, the conflict that might arise. Because if we don't have conversations about this conflict, whether we like it or not, it's gonna happen. You know, someone is going to come, and there's always a toss of power Wherever there are humans, there's always thirst for power. And it is very, very vital for us to look at the importance of it, how it benefits us. Because if the young people are not trained, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, those young ones, someone that is 30, 40 today, will be 50, 60 by then. And they will be the ones in the leadership positions. They will be the ones in those rooms having those deliberations. When they've not been trained on the importance of how vital collectively we have to work together, how vital these resources are for the collective benefit of the people on earth, and how vital it is that nobody says, I have to be the Lord and overall of this entire property or this entire space. So we need to begin to train people and then let them see the beauty of it. As much as there's a tussle, there's also a beauty in the space exploration and space travel. That is why you have the young ones, they're excited when they see things fly. They're excited when you talk to them about astronauts. They're excited when you talk about satellites and rockets and you show them videos. There's a beauty part of it that we also have to appreciate and we have to educate and we have to discuss and teach people, the young people in Jamaica, Caribbeans, South Americans, people that are farmers, they don't know anything about this. There's the beauty part of it, there's the very, very dangerous part of it, but we need to have discussions around them and have deliberations on how to educate, how to move forward, what are the plans moving forward, and what are the important stakeholders that need to be engaged for us to have a peaceful future. We don't want a future where, for one reason or the other, we are all at war.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Adam, I want to come back to you, and Abraham, I want you to think about this question. I'm going to give some preamble. So the reason why I wanted to end with this session in particular is because we have the UN Summit of the Future taking place this year. There are two important documents which are now in process. And from what I understand, the government document cannot be changed, right? Because they're already deliberated and agreed on certain things. So even if they stand around for comments, there's not much you can do. Maybe a comma or plus, but not any substantive change. I know this because I met with the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Jamaica and they told me there's going to be no substantive change. However, civil society processes are still happening, and the next civil society conference is going to be May in Nairobi, Kenya. Now, to the best of my knowledge, there is not a Space Futures coalition in the community. And I have not found anybody so far online that is that eager to take me on when I say we need to put this on the agenda. So I'm still fighting to get this on the agenda. So from the point of view of a New Zealand academic institution, could we, Adam, using your institution, and maybe we can find others, put together, because they're saying that coalitions coming out of this process should be impact coalitions. So in fact, they're calling them impact coalitions. So they're not, civil society is doing something different for the first time. They're not so much focused on a document being established and fixed, but they're focusing on establishing impact coalitions, which we're now arguing, should they be fixed coalitions or could new ones emerge? I am fighting for certainly a space future impact coalition to be developed as an outcome of the civil society process. But I don't have anybody else right now at the table. So as we think about this, what's coming next? This is the first time ever that the United Nations has said we have to intentionally think about the future of humanity and how we share this planet. I'm excited about that. I have an article I wrote in 2014 about that. I'm ecstatic about that, one. Now, two, NGOs are used to working in silos, right? But space really encompasses everything. So in my deliberations at the meeting yesterday, I said to them, most NGOs are not really futures oriented. They're really thinking about problems of today. But the future is not a destination. It's a journey. It's always evolving. So the future today is that we're going to have ISS privatized. We're talking about orbiting the moon. We're talking about living on the moon and going to Mars. In 10 years, Abraham, when you are 40, right, you're going to be talking about maybe going to Venus. Who knows? My point is to be a different future. So whatever deliberations we as civil society put forward must have an impact coalition, and that is focused on an emerging thing that's not yet defined, like space, like ocean seabed mining, like synthetic biology, these frontier technologies that are not fixed. They are moving target. From your perspective, both as a futurist working in academia, Adam, then, my question is, how might an organization, how do you see this pact for the future possibly being actioned? Because it's going to be very vague, right, from a space perspective. And Abraham, the question for you is, there is a Futures Declaration on Futures Generation Pact, which is meant to address young people. It's not too late for SGAC to probably say something. How, if SGAC has not already said something, how might like someone like yourself in the leadership of SGAC say, hey guys, can we write up something and put in a document, just at least begin to enter the space of this global conversation about creating a future of sustainability and hopefully of peace that should include not just the planet, but space, which is relevant for our survival on this planet. So I hope that question is clear. I'm giving you a background. So Adam, first you, and then Abraham, you. So Adam, what do you think we can maybe get academics working on space futures to think about?
It's a good question, I'd say. But I'm sorry, and first of all, by the way, sorry, because I don't think I actually said thank you for having me to this event, because I think it's 5 a.m. My brain has not kicked in yet. So sorry, I feel very rude about this. So I do apologize. It's but obviously I've spoken to you before. I really appreciate this. So thank you.
No problem.
But yeah, well, I have a question for you first, actually. It's just so with something like an impact collaboration. Who do you know already who you need to influence, or is that part of what you're asking us as well? Who would that be targeted at to try and influence the decision?
Let's think about this. So impact coalitions are saying a large part of why the UN is doing this futures conversation is because they know that our planetary sustainability demands a new way of thinking. So they want to have governments think about using foresight. They want to have organizations foresight. Now we know we have to train more people to be futures literate, right? That's an ongoing thing. So that's one piece. But an impact coalition, as I am imagining, would be, for example, those people who are organizing around agriculture will focus on making sure we have food security into the future, for example. So you're impacting the different international agencies, you impact your own ministry, depending on if you're a local NGO versus if you're a regional NGO versus if you're international NGO. Each NGO might have a different level of influence, but they want to have a coalition of NGOs that would say focus on, let's call it food security. Might be one issue. There's definitely one I know forming around climate change, right? So we know, yes, they have COP, they sign agreements, and nobody actually follows the agreement and all this drama. For NGOs, it's always a battle to actually get governments to say what they said in the meeting, right? There's always competing interests. So I think the space community, which is now being driven largely by private sector, right? Because there's no longer just a public sector space community. It's a private sector space community. When they talk about mining the moon, they're very focused on profits. That's it. And people like me are saying, when you hear somebody say in public, the moon is up there doing nothing, it's a very frightening statement. So my response is like shock and horror, not shock and awe. It's shock and horror because I'm thinking, wait a minute, the moon is not there, not doing nothing. And if you say things like nothing we could do on the moon can ever impact the earth, I think that is an assumption that is too early to make. So an impact coalition on space futures will be focused, I think, on perhaps, number one, agreeing to always have a futures perspective, so that there should be, before any decision is signed, any treaty is signed, there should be probably a brain trust of us looking at the future potential consequences of that decision. And it should be a neutral one, which is not dominated by only academics from the global north that have money, but academics like myself from the global south who have no money and have no shock to defend, right? Should also be able to say, wait a minute, being part of this brain trust, creating the scenarios of the possible consequences of A, B, C, or D, so that better decisions can be made around a policy, because space policy is not yet determinate. Many countries have not signed the different treaties, the Moon Treaty, there's all kind of, and Abraham might know much more about these treaties. They're not signing them because they want to reserve the right to make profit. Meanwhile, people like me are wondering, are we going to be alive if they destroy the moon? So we need a people-centric, a human-centric, not geopolitical-centric. We need for NGOs and civil society to be human-centric, to be planet-centric, not profit-centric, when we enter the conversation on space futures. So my question then is, if we're trying to form an impact coalition, maybe all we can just do at this point is write a series of questions that need to be answered. But even those questions could inform the shape of the future, because they're all emergent. We're trying to co-create this future. It's a what's next. We don't know. We're trying to come out. This is a very emergent space. So everybody in the room here might have an idea that could trigger, oh my God, I hadn't thought about that. And a new idea now becomes the one that rises to the top. But we have to look at indigenous law about property. How do we learn from, the Maori people, the Aboriginals in Australia, the Ecuadorian Indians who have managed to own property collectively for hundreds and thousands of years. But we are saying we can only own property the Western way. We have got to change that dialogue. And that's what I want to come out, some of that I want to come out of this conversation I'm having with the both of you, and anybody that's on the call that might have an idea, because this is all new. Everybody has a vision of the future, and all visions can count to together make something worthwhile happening.
I agree with. Oh, sorry. Am I okay to follow on? Because I agree with what you're saying there, but I think what will be really important is that it's not just academia that are involved in that process. That definitely part of the process, but that there is a lot. I mean, there's a lot you can learn from. I think there's a lot of good lessons we could bring in from how public sector work as well, because they're working across. I mean, governments and your regional, local governments as well, because there's a lot of work they're doing with communities or working across economy and social and cultural issues. So I think there needs to be a diversity of voices from expertise, but also just experiences of lived life experiences that are a part of this mix. So I think that's a point I'd like to make. And you touched on another important point, I thought, which was about having people-centric decision making. I think there's what we could bring into this process, into this coalition, is some really good, strong lessons that we've learned from things that are happening on Earth now, particularly what's led us. Maybe look back first of all, just how have we got to where we are now with some of the challenges we face, like around climate change. We know that some of the issues, why we've arrived at here, is exploitive economic business models where environment has been externalized, but exclusion of some voice in decision making as well. So I think so one of the strongest lessons we could bring is that actually it's about environment and people at the center of decision making. So I think that's something we can use futures and foresight processes to do. But that also means not just Earth environment. It means about actually changing our perspective that space is an environment itself. Each one, like orbital space, has its own limits to what you can to what you can take from it. But that's the other important, I think we need to be careful, I think, through this as well. So another important point that I think this coalition could be clear on is what are those assumptions we're making? Because we don't want to just make an assumption that we can go and take stuff from the moon. Maybe some countries, some people don't want to do that because there's actually a visual connection, a cultural connection, historic connection to just that, the intrinsic value of that particular thing. So I think we'd need to be careful. I guess we're not just going in with the assumption that we are going to do it, but also recognizing the reality that there is, like you said, there's a private sector led effort with space at the moment, which is really pushing it, advancing it, I should say. Sorry. So it's, I think, not ignoring that reality. So it's making sure we build a partnership, I guess, with those organizations, so they also have to be part of that conversation, I guess is where I'm going with that. Because what we're trying to do, I guess, is that you've pointed this out, that the driver behind some of this is people are excited, they want to explore, but there is also that profit driver as well. And it's to recognize that that's what some of those businesses are intending to do. But how can we, through this coalition, make sure that we're adding those broader social, economic, and environmental and cultural values to those decisions? I really like that idea of that impact coalition. If we don't have that already, it's something that could look at the consequences, build new narratives, new stories about how we. So I was liking some of the things you were saying, Abraham, around how do we envision, particularly from maybe younger minds who are going to be living in these futures. How do we ensure that we're building those stories where they're connecting? All of us can make a connection to what's going on with those futures, which I think you can do with with the foresight practices through the Impact Coalition. And then there was one other point I was going to make on that as well, which has just slipped my mind. So I'll come back to that. But I see a lot of potential. Oh, that's what I was going to say. I think if you can get people together now, I think there probably are things you could start working on. So you talked about consequences, and that you could definitely start thinking about what's the consequences of the current decisions that are being made particularly around Artemis Accords, and what's the plans for that exploration program, but also about the infrastructure developments that they're talking about doing through there. We could start putting people together to think about what's the consequences of those decisions. That's definitely something I think we could work on.
Thank you so much. I'm raising the issue simply because this is a real potential opportunity for us to have space futures take center stage in the early phases of this conversation. And I've been told that typically to have an impact coalition, you have to have at least, I don't know, is it 5 groups that want to do it? So I have to really find, beside myself, who else is there? Hence my saying, if you already have a group in New Zealand, I can say, okay, that's one group who wants to be a part of it. If I can get SJC, that would be 3, right? And we can nose around and find 2 more. So in our next meeting, I can say, hey, I'm proposing a coalition, and here are the 5 groups that are going to be leading this thing to get started. So Abraham, the floor is yours. What are you thinking? We have something called a Declaration on Future Generations. I looked at it, it also does not reference space. And definitely your generation has to ensure that we have a safe, just use of outer space so that you can actually live and have grandchildren and great-grandchildren 7 generations from now. So you are looking out, you are looking out at possible being around in the year 2100, right? And my book, Smart Futures for a Flourishing World, has a story from 2100. So this is not impossible. You could very well be alive in 2100. So you can go as far out as what do you want our presence in space to be like in 2100. I tend to stop at 2058 because I'll be 100 then. And I say, okay, if I live to 100, that's good. I can go up to 2058. But you can be alive in 2100. What would you want to see? And do you see importance of putting something like this coalition on the stage now in the early part of this now global movement to have futures and foresight be part of the international multilateralism and national work to keep us going as a species?
Thank you so much for that. I think it's very, very, very vital to make sure that, first of all, we are part of the conversations. I think your question is a very, very good question, because we have to be at the table. When you are not at the table to make conversations, to be part of the conversations, you don't even know what is said. You know, the decisions are already made before you get there. And then what the only things you can do is to complain. Well, I will start from this part. As an organization, SGAC, we have been, an observer, a permanent observer at the UN COPIUS, Committee on Peace, Research and Outer Space in Austria. And every year we've always worked towards making sure we are bringing policies to the table, we are bringing contributions to the table to help in this conversation. So we have two major things that actually are very unique, especially particular to what we are discussing. We have the Space Generation Advocacy and Policy Platform that every year we are looking at advocating for the youth, for the future of space, to have a platform where the policies that are being put into place are actually engaging the next generation. So we have that policy platform. We write the policy, and it is being submitted to the UN COPIUS every year. And we also just generated in a couple of months back the intergenerational path for space sustainability, something we believe and it was a document prepared by a lot of people from all around the world to try and think about how can we actually work towards the future to have sustainability, to not have a world in a couple of years where we've destroyed our future before we even started, And if some people that were back there in the early days, if they had destroyed a lot of the resources we had, we wouldn't be enjoying the wealth of resources we have at this moment. Now we've worked a lot to destroy a lot of things. The hope is that we are at least able to have sustainability so that the future have something to build upon. And coming back to the world I see by the 22nd century, definitely one of the things that will be a major point of reflection of happiness and joy and gratitude is that we now have a world where everybody is working together. There's no prejudice between Asians and the West, or Africans and Europeans. We have gotten to a point where we are working together for the collective good of everybody, whether you are black or white, green or yellow, blue or violet. We are all working towards what is our benefit, the resources we are put into space. Because I want to believe we've the world has. I wasn't there when the first man was sent to space, but the world from record has really moved really, really far and fast in the last 60 years. So looking at the volume of the work that has been done 60 years plus ago to the potential of the work that can be done moving forward, 60, 70, 80 years from now, this world will be totally transformed. And that is why it is so important for me that the young ones are really informed. You see in these days, a lot of the young ones, they are naive, and we are not as educated as we used to be as a society. So which is why having platform for engagement, educational platform, engaging university schools, engaging the policymakers to be educated about what exactly it is, the decision, the impact of the decisions that we are making, what it has for the future, 10, 20, 30 years, 40 years from now, 50 years from now and beyond. We need to begin to equip. There's a lot of capacity building that has to go into a lot of these countries. There are some countries today that they don't even know anything about space. Today, 2024, There are some countries, it looks like, oh, they are not from the earth. Well, if you go and talk about space in some countries and in some schools, it looks like you are alien. You don't live on earth. You know, that is the current status of where we are right now, which only shows the amount or the volume of work we have to do. Number one, educating people, equipping people, letting people know what exactly it is that is happening right now and the potential of what can be in the future. Educating policymakers, because I tell a lot of people, the space industry is beautiful, it's great, it's very nice, it's niche, but a lot of scientists and engineers will be useless without policymakers. Because if they don't make policies for some things to be done, if they don't issue contracts for some projects to be executed, scientists and engineers will just have to sit down and, you know, just go to the office doing nothing. Because policymakers form a vital part of our future. As much as we need these policymakers for even engineering and science and projects, we also need them very, very well educated so that the intercontinental collaborations and conversations and discussions are done properly. We need people of the Caribbean, Asians, Americans being educated, Africans educated, so that even when they are going to make a deal, they are well informed of what they are signing. You get, not just that you're telling people, oh, this is good, or you tell them, oh, this is good for the next 5 years, but 10 years after, it's going to be destructive. But they have not really been informed about the details of what they are signing. So because they add the first part, it is good for the first 5 years, they go ahead and sign it. You get what I'm saying? So that is the essence of making sure everybody is actually well informed, promoting the education every day.
Well, this is why the whole issue of the UN push is one of the big outcomes they have in both documents is that government should really start using foresight and futures in their decision making. As some of you may know, Wales Futures Generation Commission stands as a sort of a template of what could be put in place in countries going forward. And some certainly have been trying to get governments to look at it. I'm here actually trying to get this done. You know, I'm harassing people, and thankfully, hopefully, I get an introduction to somebody soon with which I can have a conversation about just starting something small right here in the state in which I live in the US, because the US tends to do things by state and not by the whole country, right? They're very much fragmented way of working. Certainly Jamaica, I tried, but that didn't work. But I'll probably go back if I'm able to do it in Maryland. I go back to Jamaica and say, well, see, I was taken seriously somewhere, or maybe we can now do it. But as we think about what next for space, immediately what's on the road is we have these two opportunities. We have these opportunities in terms of the UN Summit of the Future, which is down the road. It's an immediate opportunity to impact the future of space through even submitting a paper or submitting a response. And I'm urging both of you to look at that document and see if your organizations could respond to it individually. The second opportunity we have at What Next for Space is we can see if we can get an impact coalition officially being named as an outcome of the civil society process coming out of Nairobi. And I'm fighting for that, but I know if it's me alone, it's not going to happen. So whether or not you guys actually go, if I can say, yes, SJC is interested and your network in New Zealand is interested, and we can figure out who else we can find, we can hopefully at least get them to give us a potential entry point. I think there's a number of like, you have to have 7, but at least if I have 3, better than what I have now, which is none, right? I have to start with what I have. But I really feel like we'll be missing the boat if that wasn't on the table. So that's what's next for the future of space. What's next for the future of space? I think a coalition like that could help to create a new way of looking. Because as I said, it wouldn't necessarily be full only of space people, but it's full of what I call more activists around agriculture, activists around oceans management, activists around climate change, activists around education, all of which benefit from space science, engineering, and technology. They just don't see it that way, but they actually are important to the the conversation. And I truly believe if we're talking about the peaceful uses of outer space, we've had 3 sessions this morning. We started off with building foundational capacity, and we talked about how can we educate young people. The second group, we talked about space sustainability, huge question, the space debris question, space traffic management, but space being a big one. How can we educate people? How can we create new partnerships so that countries understand what they're giving up when they say to Elon Musk, go ahead and take our orbit and do what you will, right? Because right now, that company has the largest number of satellites in space right now. Is this the future we want, where one person or 2 companies own the majority of assets? And I don't believe that these are publicly held companies. So you can't even say, okay, become a shareholder and own a piece of it. So what are we really saying if we're talking about this future of satellite industry, for example? Then there's the future of space settlement, right? These rules are being made up now. You have Artemis Accords on one side and the Roscosmos group on one side, and everybody's jockeying for power. And in the meantime, they're also testing anti-ballistic weapons in space. Is this what we want? Do we want to be fearful going forward? I mean, how do we as civil society say, wait a minute, this is really taking this war thing too far? We don't want a war in outer space ever, right? But everybody's pushing the agenda that it's safe to carry nuclear things up to space. It's safe to use nuclear energy on the moon. I'm not so sure who is the counterpoint to these questions and these conversations, because typically the academics who are against it are very few and they don't get enough platform. So how do we educate civil society to know that there are actually other people who don't think you have to use nuclear energy in space? You can use magnetic energy in space. You can use solar-based space energy. So we don't need to take the risk of putting a nuclear reactor on a spaceship. Then if it crashes on the way there, it drops into our ocean and we have killed the ocean for years to come. So we really have to move very diligently in thinking about this future. So I'd love to come back to you, Adam. You're in an academic setting in New Zealand, which is considered, I would say, for boys of a term, it's considered an emerging space nation. And it's seen as being sort of a maverick country to some extent in terms of space. So it's not yet seen as, okay, they're following the storyline of everybody else. When you think about what other people, not necessarily you, tell me what you're hearing out there. Do you think there's an appetite for this conversation in New Zealand? And same thing for you, Abraham. Is there an appetite for this in Nigeria? Because you are still plugged into people at home. What is the appetite? There's 2 ends, New Zealand and Nigeria. What is the appetite for this conversation in New Zealand? What's the appetite for this conversation in Nigeria? Starting with you, Adam.
So, okay. Well, thanks for that. I think I would say this is a really interesting question, because just to say something before that, I was thinking one thing, and it goes back to the education point that Abraham was making as well, was and it's related to the experiences I'm about to mention. It does feel like there's an exercise first, or some of explaining why this is important to do, because you were saying, Claire, that the NGOs don't tend to work with foresight at the moment. It's not something that they've been working with. So, and I would say it was the same. Certainly for long term with private sector as well. From my experience, it's not a long term, not a long term thinking process. So I wonder how much work needs to go in first to actually say why we need to do this. Otherwise, it might not be taken on. And I'd say that's some experience that I want to bring from here as well, from what we've done through the university, is that when it comes to those immediate issues, thinking about space debris, for example, those things that are present now, I would say there's an appetite for thinking at least sort of short, medium term about how we deal with these. Longer term considerations where we're anticipating potential issues, risks, or just collective visions, and I think that's a bit harder to make stick about why you would want to be doing that. And yeah, so I can understand why from both private sector point of view and from, I deliberately say private sector there, sorry, just because obviously they're leading the way on some of these things. So yeah, I'd say there's appetite for that shorter, medium term things that tend to be business planning length periods, like 5 to 10 years, but longer than that, it's harder, I think, to get it to stick. Yeah, so that's what I'd say to that point.
Abraham, what appetite is there for futures conversations or space futures conversations in any aspect of Nigerian society?
So I want to really say this, that there is a very, very, very wet appetite. We are really, really ready for these conversations. And I know as SJC also, we are always trying as much as possible to be part of these conversations, these discussions, and to be part of projects and events where we are able to discuss about the future. So there's a very wet ground. Every year we have different programs, different platforms that we introduce to the African society. For instance, I have an event personally, and then we have an SJC event coming up in Nigeria later in the year. We have the Nigerian Space Symposium coming up in August, and we have the African Space Generation Workshop coming up in November in Nigeria. And those are two major platforms. The one is for the Nigerian Space Symposium is for students and young professionals to come together, deliberate on the future of space for the country, for applications, for local applications, for things that we can do also to collaborate with other countries. And the African Space Generation Workshop is an SJC event, also to bring together African populace to discuss, to deliberate, to look at what is happening, how can we work together, where are the platforms of open conversation. So there is definitely a appetite. There are people that are thriving despite their not so much available resources. People are doing their very possible best to contribute, to learn, to want to develop, to want to be part of the conversation. So I know that, as much as we talk about the negative side, that is the positive side. That is the inspiring part of this space journey, in the sense that there are people that they are from not so well-to-do families, but they thrive. They put in every effort to be part of this conversation, to go to school, to learn, to write their projects, to write articles and write papers and do what the very possible best of the things they can do to be part of this conversation, to be part of this discussion. I know in this point, I'm also saying on behalf of all the people that, I have struggled one point or the other, done one thing or the other that probably some other part of the world wouldn't even think happens, like struggling with visa or struggling with traveling or struggling with finance to go to school. There are people that are available all across Africa, and even I'm sure in Asia and some other parts of the world too, but they are doing their possible best. So in terms of, is there an appetite for it? There's a very strong appetite for it, because there are people that are out there that have the skills, they have the mindset, they have the intellect, they are brilliant, they have that capability to be able to contribute, but they need to be able to be empowered to properly contribute to this future. Yeah, so I can very much say personally, I'm with you in this coalition. I can definitely have a conversation with SJC and see how we can also contribute. But I know that SJC as an organization is always very much, willing and enthusiastic to being part of conversations for the future. So yes, that is one thing I can share with you. Yeah.
Well, we're running down to closing remarks, and I just want to say, first of all, that when I look back at the arc of the conversation, I know you all were on from the beginning. We began our conversation today in celebration of International Spaceflight Day with Judy Sandrock from Max IQ talking about building foundational capacity. And unfortunately, the people from Mauritius and Maldives were not able to attend. One is actually in a training, and the other one is sick. So, but both Maldives and Mauritius, as small island developing states, are important to just have as a touchstone, because the fact is Mauritius has launched a CubeSat last year, with support from JAXA, that's the Japan Space Agency. And Maldives is now thinking about what they can do because they have a huge archipelago that they have to manage, and they see space as an opportunity to better manage their marine economic zone. And they both have conferences. Mauritius is next week, and Maldives is going to be the end of April. So that's where we start. Then we moved on to a conversation on space sustainability. And we had Dr. Mariba Jah, who is a leader in the space debris question and space sustainability. He is a distinguished researcher. He's invented a new software that can find things. And he is actually just named recently a Nat Geo Explorer for space. And we talked up there about how might we partner to do stuff differently. And what was exciting from that conversation, we came up with an actionable insight. For each session, we tried to leave with an actionable insight. And so the first session was, okay, we can expand the number of schools that are doing basic foundational capacity, but more importantly, we can take the basic foundational capacity work that Max IQ is doing, rewrite it for adults, right? And have that to train the policymakers who are not scientists, because they don't understand what they're looking at. So rather than them just say, okay, we're only going to train K through 12 to do experiments, we can use this content that they have, repurpose it to run like mini space boot camps for, like, say, mini online, and we run some live ones, live asynchronous, live online, everybody on at the same time, like a MOOC. We can also run some asynchronous so that they can have some basic fundamental awareness of what they're looking at when they hear people talking about using, something like data for agriculture, for example. So there's that. Then the second group, we talked about sustainability. What we came out of that one with was, okay, we need to find a way to spread the conversation on sustainability literacy, because like the EU, ESA has talked about circular space economy, but the US is not talking about that. How do we get those words out there? And we thought, okay, well, Max IQ already has some schools in Africa. Maybe every school in Africa that's trying to build a satellite should be looking at the sustainability question, and maybe having hackathons around that to get people thinking about how can we design not only to launch a CubeSat, but to retrieve it, right? And look at new ways in valuing space debris, so it now becomes not debris, it becomes an input to something else. That way people might actually want to collect it. So there's that. That's an actionable insight. The last session, we focused a lot on education and workforce development. And we centered most of our conversation about the world's biggest analog, which is happening next year. And the idea is to have a huge analog with all the different analog stations around the world, or as many as want to participate. I think there are about 13, and we're trying to insert the first African one. So let's say there are about 18 eventually might go forward, and do it in such a way, however, that it's not just the 18 analog astronaut groups learning from each other, but that we actually impact the global conversation on space government. And so what came out of that as an actionable insight was maybe the African universities that were on that conversation can now begin to talk about, okay, how can we take this event and make it a learning thing down to October of next year when they actually do the event, right? So we have trainings of schools of what they can do as a school observing, etc., even they don't have an analog astronaut facility in their country. And that was a really great conversation. Last conversation, what is our actionable insight? So I want each of you to space something specific as an actionable insight you take away that I can feel, wow, I've had a great day and I have homework to go and do. So let's begin with Adam Morris. What is the actionable insight you have taken away about how we might be able to shift the shape of the future as a result of our working together?
Well, well, quite energetic after this, actually. I haven't been able to listen to the previous sessions, but something that I've been left quite hopeful about is actually that we're not on our own, that there's actually, just from these conversations, I feel like there's a lot of potential, a lot of interest in doing this. And so I feel like if we can get all those like minds together, which I feel like this is where this might be going, that's left me really hopeful that, because sometimes I think what you see in the news, what's going on with environmental change and things, you feel like sometimes it's a bit hard to do anything, but actually this makes me feel quite hopeful. So I'd like to carry on the conversation, and so it'd be good to follow up with you, and maybe we could bring in some of my other colleagues, and we can talk about that. But yeah, I've been left quite hopeful, and particularly from things that I was hearing from you, Abraham. If more younger people have really got a strong appetite for this, this is fantastic. That's good. But I think it'd be really important to, like you say, they have to be in the conversation, because I see it all the time that younger voices are excluded from decision making, and it needs to change. So if we can bring all this together, I feel very hopeful. So it's so that's left me feeling good about that.
Abraham, what's your action and the takeaway?
Thank you so much. Excuse me. And thank you, Dr. Adam. I think it's really good hearing from you and hearing your insight. And also, I just want to pitch this real quick, that if you want me to be part of any of your events in New Zealand, I'll be happy to join virtually, or if you want to bring me in person, that is also a great thing, because one of my passion is also educating the young ones. And I just want to come finally to my actionable point, which I will make it as simple as possible, because sometimes we tend to overcomplicate things. I want to take one of the things you said earlier in terms of the hackathon. Is a very, very good idea to do it in as many countries as possible. And, probably we have a particular mission. We'll try and organize these hackathons in as many countries and see different outputs that we get from those countries, and we can compare them. It also helps. And also, when we have a prize for them, they are motivated towards something. And the second part of it that would be a very great actionable point, because I know it works, is also having summits, events, conferences, symposiums in different regions of the world around these topics, because we are able to bring together the students, the young ones, the senior professionals, and the agencies in those regions, introducing these topics of the future to them. So I have an Nigerian Space Symposium coming on, so I will definitely include you. So you have a slot already in our Nigerian Space Symposium to discuss about the future and the things about the future, because we really need to be having discussions around this. So having events in different regions around this, initiating conversations within the school system, within the government system, and within young professionals is really, really vital, because that is where it starts from. When we have those conversations, ideas come into mind, people begin to work on their ideas, and possibly we get institutions or organizations that can also empower them to achieve those ideas. So I will leave you with that. Thank you for having me today. It's really been a great one.
Yeah. And for me, thank you so much for both of you being here. My actionable insight is this: I would like to make sure that Abraham identifies the SJC focal points in New Zealand. We introduce them to Adam's group, and they can get going in terms of SJC New Zealand. Now, if it turns out that SJC New Zealand doesn't have focal points, we then make sure Adam knows this, and he can make sure that his university posts the call to make sure that at least one person from his university can join SJC if they don't have focal points. So that's a very small step to move forward. Make sure SJC New Zealand is talking to Adam's Space Futures group. Another action item for me is coming out of this is really to make the effort to put together a module on space futures, or a game on space futures that can be easily replicated. And so I will be probably using Adam as a testing group once I have a game to maybe play with some of his students, and Abraham to have as another group of people to play with their members from Nigeria, to see how we can come up with self-manageable tools that people can use to teach themselves how to think about the future of space. And I'm just very grateful as always that I have people who believe in the vision of that I have, that together we can indeed create an opportunity for space to be really for everyone everywhere by organizing, by coming together without any fanfare, but come together in our small ways to begin the conversations. Because this small circle leads to bigger circles, and our overlapping circles will inevitably, I think, cover our planet. So thank you all for being here and being a part of it.
Dr. Nelson,
Yes.
just to point out the fact that some of us sitting here also have an interest in what you guys are doing, and the media is one of the areas that we need to identify and utilize.
Okay, so I'm going to put you in charge of helping us identify certain media houses from other small island states as a starting point. Maybe begin with the Caribbean media houses to see how we can get them involved, given that we're going to have a UN conference on small island states in Antigua, and that'd be a starting point. But I'm going to shut down officially, and if you have to leave, fine, and Trevor, you can stay on and we can continue. But again, thank you all for being a part of this. Until October, when we meet again officially as the Space Futures Forum for World Space Week. Thank you.